Okay, my name is Howard Eber, and I am an alcoholic. I want to welcome everyone to week number 58 of this cycle. Week number 58, where we go through the first 164 pages and we don't skip a page. We don't skip any chapters anymore. So it's taken a little bit longer than it may have in the past, but we're going to get to those chapters, those missing chapters, those wives and families and employers and so on. And where we are today is we're in chapter 10. We have just completed working with others, and we took a jump over a couple of chapters, which we're going to come back to. Wives and so on, family, we're going to get to. But we go to employers right after working with others because I believe that there's a lot of information in employers that's relevant to working with others. There's the same advice that's given in this chapter for working with employees and dealing with employees who may have an alcohol problem. Well, it's given us as sponsors the same advice that could be helpful in dealing with our sponsees. So as we go through the chapter, we're also going to try, whenever possible, to point out those directives, those suggestions for working with others, those little gems that Bill puts in this chapter. And just by way of background, this chapter was originally written by Hank Parkhurst. Andy, if you can give me the Hank Parkhurst, the little bio and the picture, just so we know who we're talking about. Hank Parkhurst was Bill's partner in this writing endeavor. Bill Shaberg, who wrote the book Writing the Big Book, calls Hank the founder who drank because Hank did relapse. But Bill also says, no Hank, no book. That without Hank, this book would not have gotten written because he was the driving force to get Bill, who could be typically New England lazy, to get him to work, sit down and do that writing, do that typing. And this is the guy we're talking about. This is Hank Parkhurst. He was a Standard Oil executive. He was fired because of his drinking. Bill asked him, or he volunteered to do the writing of this chapter because he worked with a lot of people. I think the number that was given in the beginning of this was 6,600 men that he'd supervised over his term at Standard Oil. He then had his own company, Honors Dealers in New Jersey, which nowhere near as successful as Standard Oil, but it did provide a home base for Bill to sit and write the book and have Ruth Hock there typing it out for him. He was the first successful patient, if you want to call it, or referral, the first successful referral that Bill got after he came back from his stay in Akron working with Dr. Bob and leaving behind Dr. Bob, Bill Dotson, Ernie Galbraith, and that's it in Akron. And when he came back to New York and started to work out of towns, this is the first successful candidate he had. The next one was Fitz Mayo, and we'll talk about Fitz a little later on. But Hank was the first referral. He was an attendee at the Tuesday night meeting at Bill's house before they had any other locations. They were meeting at Bill's house. His story, The Unbeliever, was in the first edition, but because of his relapse was removed. If you'd like to read it, it's in the book Experience, Strength, and Hope, which is a compilation of all of the stories that were ever in the book that for whatever reason were removed. So the stories don't ever disappear. And this story is real interesting. You may want to read if you haven't read The Unbeliever, because Hank, right before the book was written, he and Ruth Hock took a course, a writing course. And he got very experimental when he wrote his story. He wrote this Unbeliever in kind of a stream of conscious, it's kind of like applying jazz to music in a stream of consciousness. And it makes his story quite interesting, quite challenging, I should say. But if he wrote this employers that way, it would have been unfathomable. So Bill had an understanding that he was going to re-edit everything that Hank wrote. And in the case of two employers, he just about rewrote everything. He tried to be true to the points Hank was trying to make, but be that as it may, Hank was not the best directive for how to write. Andy, let me see the background quote, if you would. I think that's all we called it, is background quote. It's the Bill Shaberg quote.
Got it. 2 secs.
Thank you. There we go. As I said, Hank had recently taken this writing school course, after which he was constantly advising Bill on how to improve his style, which is interesting because I think Bill's style is just fine. These suggestions didn't sit particularly well with Wilson, who later noted rather bluntly that in this regard, quote, he didn't go for Hank's advice very much. So Bill entirely rewrote To Employers so that it made a lot more sense. And Andy, we may as well get 137.2 up, the quote as well, because we're going to get started on that chapter. When he begins telling the story in To Employers, this is a quote from Bill Shaberg about the way it began. He said he then immediately proceeds to tell, after he qualifies who he is, and he had so many employees. He then proceeds to tell the dramatic story of 3 men he fired for drinking, each of whom committed suicide. One jumped from a hotel window, another put a shotgun in his mouth and pulled the trigger, the third hung himself in the family woodshed. This fate, Hank says, may well have been his own if it were not for the intervention of an understanding person, quote unquote, who gave him a new perspective on alcoholism and thereby saved his life. And the one person that is most often referred to here is Bill. And I think that the person he's really referring to more than Bill is Dr. Silkworth, because Dr. Silkworth explained to him that he wasn't a weak person. He wasn't an immoral person. He had an illness, a 3-part malady made up of his physical allergy, the mental obsession, and the spiritual malady. And where we are, we're on page 138. But as I said, he starts the chapter off by giving us these examples of 3 people he fired who committed suicide at some point because of their alcoholism. And as we begin to read To Employers, Hank is blaming himself that if he would have been more understanding as an employer, maybe he could have saved these guys by not firing them, by maybe sending them to treatment or maybe introducing them to AA. None of this he knew when he was supervisor and did fire these guys. So where we are today is on page 138. I think we're on paragraph 2, but let's start at paragraph 1. Here, for example, if everyone can find that, the first full paragraph here, for example, is a typical example. And as I mentioned last week, I find it ironic that we who think of ourselves as being so terribly unique and so different from everybody else, that we would ever follow a pattern that is so easily recognizable. And it turns out our behavior patterns are indeed noticeable because of their abnormality. Out of the ordinary behavior stands out, and it cannot help but be identified as problematic. So he mentions typical behavior, and it's just interesting because I never thought I did anything that was typical. I was different in every way. In any case, an officer of one of the largest banking institutions in America knows I no longer drink. The banker worked for a bank called Morris Plan Banks. It was a network of banks that were created to assist the middle class gain home loans. Was developed by the attorney by the name of Arthur Morris, which is why they call it the Morris Plans. But this guy worked for that company and he knew of Hank's recovery. So he says, one day he told me about an executive of the same bank who, from his description, was undoubtedly alcoholic. And just to mea culpa here, for a lot of years, I mistakenly mentioned that that was Clarence Snyder. It is not. There's no way, shape, or form that this could apply to Clarence. And I did some investigating, and sure enough, I was wrong. I don't know where. I got it from somebody who was as misinformed as I was when I repeated it. So if you have down in your book from a previous cycle that this is Clarence Snyder, please don't pass it along. It's not Clarence Snyder. We're not sure of exactly who it is, but we are sure of who it isn't. So in any case, we're talking about an executive who, from his description, was undoubtedly alcoholic. This seemed to me like an opportunity to be helpful, so I spent 2 hours, please underline those two words, 2 hours, talking about alcoholism. What did he say? He told him about the allergy. He told him about the obsession. So above alcoholism, I've written A/O, allergy and obsession. He's spending 2 hours with this guy, the head of this big company, explaining to him what alcoholism is, and at the same time explaining what it isn't. It isn't a moral dilemma. It is an illness. It is a physical and a mental condition. And he says, we spent 2 hours talking about alcoholism, the malady, and described the symptoms and results as well as I could. His comment was, very interesting, but I'm sure this man is done drinking. He's just returned from a 3-month leave of absence, has taken the cure, looks fine, and to clinch the matter, the board of directors told him this was his last chance. Anybody ever be told any of those things? You look great, pal. You had a couple of months off. You had time off. You're looking great. You're looking healthy. We're glad to have you back. And by the way, remember, we said if you ever drank again or drugged again, you'd be out. Just want to remind you of that. So basically, they appealed with this lofty emotional appeal to him that if you ever do this again, you're out. This is your last chance. Now, Hank has spent 2 hours explaining to the guy that that kind of approach isn't going to work with the real alcoholic, that the alcoholic will drink again. That's what our first step tells us. We will drink again. So he's telling the guy that that approach doesn't work. And his response was, in this case, it will. This guy is different. So, and in answer to the question, why didn't Hank contact the guy directly? Because he wasn't, as I understand it, wasn't given the information to contact him. And it would have been kind of out of line because he wasn't working for the company and he couldn't get in between the owner of the company and the employee. He wasn't asked to do that. He was just called in as a consultant to help the executive know how to deal with the employee. And instead of using that information to help the employee, he ignores all of that information. So Hank's response, he said, was the only answer I could make was that if a man followed the usual pattern, here we go, the typical pattern. We're different, but we follow these typical patterns. He would go on a bigger bust than ever. And next to it, you may want to write, because it's progressive. Whether he's drinking or not, the disease progresses. So he spent 3 months theoretically not drinking, but his disease was progressing as if he'd been drinking every one of the days of the 3 months that he wasn't drinking. So the disease progresses. You don't come back as if you've never drank. You come back as if you never stopped. So I felt this inevitable, that there's going to be a bigger blow up here than ever, and wondered if the bank was doing the man an injustice. Why not bring him into contact with some of our alcoholic crowd? He might have a chance. I pointed out that I had nothing to drink, whatever, for 3 years, and this in the face of difficulties that would have made 9 out of 10 men drink their heads off. Why not at least afford him an opportunity to hear my story? So Hank is appealing to him. Let me talk to him. Let me tell him my story. Let me not threaten him. Let me tell him my story and let him find out what's wrong with him. Because one thing is for certain, in the 3 months that he was off, he wasn't taught about the grave nature of this disease. He wasn't exposed to the definition that Dr. Silkworth had given Bill and that had given Hank and they had given to Fitz and they had given to Dr. Bob and so on about the true nature of this disease. Why not bring him in contact? Oh no, that's the guy's response. No, said my friend. This chap is either through with liquor or he's minus a job. And please highlight this last sentence because it shows how he still misunderstands. If he has your willpower and guts, he'll make the grade. Now, let me again point out, he just spent 2 hours. Hank has spent 2 hours of his time explaining to the guy that it is not a question of willpower, that it is not about morality, it is not about good and bad. It is about the nature of the disease, that it's not all up here, that any description of the alcoholic which leaves out the physical factor, which is the illness, which is the malady, which is the allergy, is incomplete. And this guy didn't hear any of that, apparently, because he still thinks it's a matter of will. He thinks that Hank, after 2 hours of explaining to him why it wasn't about willpower, that he got sober because he reached out and attained a connection with a power greater than himself, that it wasn't about any of those things. And the guy didn't hear any of it. He still thinks Hank got sober because he pulled up his bootstraps and decided that he was going to stop drinking. And if this guy has got any of the willpower that you've got, he's in great shape. Can anyone identify with that? Yeah. Okay. I wanted to throw up my hands in discouragement. And I know how he feels. I know how he feels. You ever talk to someone for an extended period of time, a parent or a loved one, and it's clear that they didn't listen to anything you told them about the nature of this disease? That's very frustrating, extraordinarily frustrating. Okay, continue. I want to throw up my hands in discouragement, for I saw that I failed to help my banker friend understand. He simply could not believe that his brother executive suffered from a serious illness. You may want to highlight serious illness because the guy still judges him to be weak. 2 hours. I can't get that out of my head. I spent 2 hours talking to this moron, and he doesn't grasp what I told him. The simple thing, the most basic thing of what he said during those 2 hours is it's not a matter of will. And the guy didn't get any of it. There was nothing to do but wait. Presently, the man did slip and was fired. Duh, what a shock. And that's what I have written after that sentence. Duh. Because we knew it was going to happen. Following his discharge, we contacted him. Please highlight we contacted him in blue. One of the things we do in the workshop is we highlight certain colors to represent certain things, and blue represents approach. Somehow in today's culture, it became acceptable to take the position of being available for the newcomer. Well, the book doesn't tell us that. The book tells us it is our job, our responsibility to approach the person who's new, who's struggling, who's having a tough time, that it is our job to reach out to him. And we don't do that enough. And people are dying because of it. There are people languishing at the back of every meeting you may go to, and we're letting it happen. We have to stop. We have to start getting involved with those people immediately. Don't worry about scaring them away. God will scare him back in. The alcohol will bring him back in. So in any case, He was fired. Now it was okay to reach out to the guy, right? They made the approach. Without much ado, he accepted the principles and procedure that had helped us. Let's highlight principle and procedure. And I know we talked about this last week, but for those of you who may have missed it or weren't here, the principle we're talking about are the guides to our behaviors, the ideas, the outlooks. It's how we're to live. Those are the principles: tolerance, compassion, patience, humility, forgiveness, love, goodwill, to be a source of harmony rather than discord. Those are the principles by which we're trying to live. And the procedure is how we get there. In other words, the steps, the actions that we took to get to that point that help us change that our ideas, our emotions, our attitude, that God is our new employer and our job is to stay close to him and to do his bidding. So that's what we're talking about in terms of principles and procedures. Principles are the guidelines by which we'll live once we have established this relationship, and procedures are how we're going to get there. Accepted the principles and procedures that had helped us. Isn't it interesting that they explain this to the alcoholic and he immediately gets it? His boss, after 2 hours, still doesn't. You know, back in Bill's story and the doctor's opinion, we're told that knowing about the allergy and the obsession concept, it's a relief. At least it was for me. It was a great relief to know that I wasn't weak, that I wasn't immoral, that I wasn't a bad person, that I had this actual malady, this physical allergy, this mental obsession, and the spiritual malady, which makes me susceptible to all of that. It was a great relief to know that. And I think that that's why the guy grasped onto it right away. That light goes on. It's, oh, yeah, that's why. That's why I can't pick up just one. Okay. To me, he's undoubtedly on the road to recovery. To me, this incident illustrates lack of understanding as to what really ails the alcoholic and lack of knowledge as to what part employers might profitably take in salvaging their sick employees. I would suggest you underline the word profitably. Profitably salvage the sick employees. That if they know and they grasp the fact that it's not a question of morality, it's not a question of weakness, they have the allergy and the obsession. You can salvage that and potentially salvage that employee. You know, Hank's point, and he's made it and he's going to make it again, is that as an executive, you invest a lot of time and effort into your employees so they are profitable to you. Why would you just throw that away in the trash when you could possibly salvage that guy and keep him as an earner for your company? Even if you're not interested in altruistically helping the guy, if it's a question of dollars and cents, it makes sense to do this. So, continuing, if you desire to help, it might be well to disregard your own drinking or lack of it. That what you think you know, and he's directing this to employers, what you think you know based on your knowledge and your experience with alcohol is not going to help here. You have to set that aside. You have to lay aside the things you think you know. Like we say in the set aside prayer, in there is a solution. Remember, we're told that the things we need to do to begin with, number one, is lay aside prejudice. And he's talking about the same thing. Put aside the things you know. Just because you can take a drink or a joint or something or a hit of cocaine or whatever it is and stop. That's your experience. That's not this guy's. That's not mine. So you have to put aside as an employer the idea that because you're able to do that, why can't he? If we just gets it together, puts aside the lethargy and pulls it together. And he continues, and you may want to highlight this next sentence: whether you're a hard drinker, a moderate drinker, or a teetotaler, you don't drink at all, you may have some pretty strong opinions, perhaps prejudices. And once again, prejudices are just opinions formed without any basis of information, without any basis in fact. Their opinions developed without information. And he's pointing out that if you can't lay aside your prejudice, and it is prejudice, if you're looking at that employee through the eyes of somebody who can handle alcohol or these drugs, then you're doing him and your company a disservice. Those who drink moderately may be more annoyed with an alcoholic than a total abstainer would be. Drinking occasionally and understanding your own reactions, it's possible for you to become quite sure of many things which, so far as the alcoholic is concerned, are not always so. Just because they're so for you doesn't mean they're so for the alcoholic. It's not just a question of just say no. As a moderate drinker, you can take it or leave it alone. You may want to highlight that sentence and the next. In fact, highlight the rest of the paragraph. Let's just keep it simple. As a moderate drinker, you can take your liquor or leave it alone. Whenever you want to, you control your drinking. Remember, we talked about the moderate drinker, the hard drinker, the real alcoholic, the guy who can take it or leave it alone. That's not the real alcoholic. The guy, the hard drinker, who if a sufficient reason presents itself, loss of job, loss of health, loss of marriage, whatever, if it presents itself, he can stop or moderate as well. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about somebody who can't do those things. So because you can do it, doesn't mean that he can do it. Of an evening, you can go on a mild bender, get up in the morning, shake your head, and go to business. Wish I could have done that. Couldn't do that. Not without something priming me for the day. Some chemical priming me for the day. So, to you, not the real alcoholic, to you, the employer who's not a real alcoholic. So you may want to add that. To you, not the real alcoholic, liquor is no real problem. You can't see why it should be to anyone else save the spineless and stupid. That is also in some twisted way, the logic that some people who are new apply to the steps. I don't need the steps. That's stupid stuff. I just don't go to meetings and I'm fine. I've been coming to meetings for 10 years and I never worked the steps. I still yell at the kids and I still bark at this one and I still, whatever it is, just because you're not drinking doesn't mean you're sober. And that's what we're talking about here. You can't see why anyone else can't just put it aside as easily as you can. And I've highlighted the whole next paragraph, and I think this may apply to the way some of us look at some of us who relapse. See if this doesn't sound familiar. When dealing with an alcoholic, there may be a natural annoyance that a man would be so weak, let's underline weak, stupid, let's underline stupid, and irresponsible. Let's underline irresponsible. You ever thought of somebody who just relapsed, chronic relapser in those terms? You haven't? Have you ever said he doesn't want it enough? I know I've been guilty of that at one point or another. And what am I saying? I'm saying that he's weak, stupid, and irresponsible. He doesn't want it enough. He's not ready yet. Even when you understand the malady better, you may feel this feeling rising. And I've written after that, is that how you view relapses? When I'm working with a new prospect at this point, That's the question I ask him. Could that be the way you view relapses? A look at the alcoholic in your organization is many times illuminating. And we're going to point out, we're going to number these things about the looking at their employee and making these observations about their employees. And please bear in mind that the writer is a recovered alcoholic. So his clarity here is a little tainted. Number one, is he not usually brilliant, fast thinking, imaginative, and likable? That's the way you describe the average alcoholic, but only an alcoholic would use those words for us. Number one, isn't he usually, which again is another reference to being typical, and we're not typical. We're unusual. We're different. But is he not usually brilliant, fast thinking, imaginative, and likable? And P.S., I think most alcoholics fit that description. Most addicts fit that description. And if you doubt that, you try maintaining a $200 a day habit for 2 years or 3 years without a job. You think that's easy? You got to be pretty brilliant, fast thinking, and imaginative to pull that off. You try maintaining a $200 a day habit for several years without a job. Okay. When sober, does number two, here's number two, does he not work hard and have a knack of getting things done? Right? We are incredibly productive people. We're incredibly inventive people. We're resourceful people. Number three, if he has these qualities and did not drink, would he be worth retaining? And number four, should he have the same consideration as other ailing employees? And above ailing, let's write sick. Should he not be given the same consideration as the guy who has a heart condition, as the guy who has cancer, and he's been through treatment, and he's in remission, and all of a sudden he gets sick again? Or that guy with a heart condition who's been hospitalized. He's adjusted his diet. He does the right eating. He eats, takes the vitamins he's supposed to. He takes his medication. He exercises the way he's supposed to. And that son of a bitch goes and has another heart attack on you. Do you think of it in those terms? Well, that's what he's saying. You got to look at us the same way. You can't judge that son of a bee drank again. That son of a bee had the cancer again. He had another heart attack. We're all ailing employees. And number five, is he worth salvaging? So when you look at your employees who have an alcohol problem, these are 5 observations that Hank is making. But again, he's making it about himself in a way, but I think most of it is true. I really do. If your decision is yes, whether the reason be humanitarian or business or both, then the following suggestions may be helpful. So if you want to help the guy, either maybe it's humanitarian because altruistically you want to be helpful to people. So you do a solid, you help the guy out. Or maybe it's just business. He's a producer. He'd be producing better if he were sober on the job than off the job. So let's try and do everything we can to help him get sober. So then the following suggestions may be helpful. And I'm going to suggest you highlight these next 5 lines, the beginning of this next paragraph. Can you discard the feeling that you are dealing only with habit, with stubbornness, or a weak will? If this presents difficulty, rereading chapters 2 and 3, where the alcoholic sickness is discussed at length, might be worthwhile. If you don't internalize as a sponsor, if you don't, if you don't internalize the doctor's opinion, there is a solution, and more about alcoholism, you can't really help a prospect. And he's saying the same thing as an employer. You can't really be of service to that guy if that's the way you think. So reread those chapters. See if you can grasp it a second time. You, as a businessman, want to know the necessities before considering the result. Please underline and highlight this next sentence. If you concede that your employee is ill, and I've circled that word, can he be forgiven for what he's done in the past? Can his past absurdities be forgiven? His absurdities, his ridiculous, irrational behavior, like, say a jaywalker who won't give up jaywalking. Could be helpful to the employer to read that, couldn't it? Can it be appreciated that he's been a victim of crooked thinking directly caused by the action of alcohol on his brain? I well remember something about that last sentence. Let me go back. Can it not be appreciated he has been a victim of crooked thinking directly caused by the action of alcohol on his brain? There was a book at the time written by Edward Cowles that said the following. He said, the habitual drunkard craves liquor because of intracranial pressure. He has a pressure many times above that of normal individuals when drinking. This change in personality is the result of the pressure of fluid in the brain on the higher centers of the cortex. Now, that has not been proven. In fact, has been disproven. But the point is that making a statement like this, that it's directly caused by the action of alcohol on the brain, should at least maybe open the employer's eyes to that there is something at work here besides willpower. In this case, it's intracranial pressure on the brain caused by alcohol. If that's the way you view it, that's fine. You're looking at it as an illness. And that's what he's appealing to. He's really trying to get him to think of it that way. So, continuing, I well remember the shock I received when a prominent doctor in Chicago told me of cases where pressure of the spinal fluid actually ruptured the brain. A lot of you like this because I do. When you see things like a certain this or a certain that, I want to know who we're talking about. So I'm going to tell you who they're talking about. The prominent doctor in Chicago, his name is Dr. Dan Kraske, Kraske. He's also mentioned in Earl Treat's story, He Sold Himself Short. He Sold Himself Short is in the 4th edition, page 258. And Earl, you may want to, Bert, I'm sorry, you may want to make note that it's mentioned on page 265 of that story. But be that as it may, that's what we're talking about. This guy, Dan Kraske. Rob, did you have something in the chat that you put in about that?
Or I just put in something about the pressure on the brain.
Oh, okay. All right. Continuing. No wonder an alcoholic is strangely irrational. Who wouldn't be with such a fevered brain? You may want to underline fevered brain. Normal drinkers are not so affected, nor can they understand the aberrations of the alcoholic. Aberrations is defined as abnormal actions. Abnormal actions. Analogy, we've already defined, is an abnormal reaction to the ingestion of these chemicals, an allergic reaction. And we don't sneeze, sniffle, wheeze, tear, break out in hives. Our allergic reaction is the craving. And what he's saying here is that it shows itself in irrational behaviors, and it certainly does. It doesn't make us crazy. It makes us under the influence. It makes us intoxicated. It doesn't make us insane. The insanity is to think that it won't next time. No wonder the alcoholic is strange. Oh, sorry. Finish that one. Next paragraph. Your man has probably been trying to conceal a number of scrapes, perhaps pretty messy ones. They may be disgusting. You may be at a loss to understand how such a seemingly above board chap, in other words, an honest guy, how such an honest guy could be so involved, can be so dishonest. Let's put it in the words that we mean, not the words that he's using. When he says, you don't understand how an honest guy can be so dishonest. Well, because his ideas, emotions, and attitudes are warped because of the alcohol. But these scrapes can generally be charged, no matter how bad, to the abnormal action of alcohol on his mind. When drinking or getting over a bout, an alcoholic, sometimes the model of honesty, when normal, will do incredible things. Afterward, his revulsion, his revulsion may be terrible. Terrible guilt, terrible shame, terrible remorse. He's visited by the four horsemen. We're going to talk about them a couple of chapters down the line. Nearly always, these antics indicate nothing more than temporary conditions. This is not to say that all alcoholics are honest and upright when not drinking. It's quite an understatement. Of course, that isn't so. And such people may often impose on you. I'm going to suggest you highlight the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 lines, telling you not to be an enabler. And that's what this is about. Seeing your attempt to understand and help, someone will try to take advantage of your kindness. If you're sure your man does not want to stop, he may as well be discharged. The sooner, the better. You're not doing him a favor by keeping him on. You're enabling him, the guy who doesn't want to quit. But for the most part, we're talking about people who would want to quit if they knew it were possible. But he's talking about that minority here that just, they don't want to quit. They're happy. They're content being like that. So don't be an enabler. If he doesn't want to stop, let him go. That's the financial decision too. Firing such an employee may prove a blessing to him. It may just be the jolt he needs. I know in my particular case that nothing my company could have done would have stopped me so long as I was able to hold my position. I could not possibly realize how serious my situation was. Had they fired me first, and had they then taken steps to see that I was presented with the solution contained in this book, I might have returned to them 6 months later, a well man. So basically, he's telling them, let's take this from a different point of view. He said how serious the situation was. One, had they fired me first. So the first suggestion he's making is fire that guy. Fire that guy. And then what do? You take steps to see that he's presented with the solution. Get him to rehab. Get him to treatment. Get him to meetings. That's what he's telling the employers. If the guy wants to stop, fire him and direct him to where he can get help. But there are many men who want to stop, and with them you can go far. Your understanding treatment of their cases will pay dividends. Again, we are earners. We are hard workers. Perhaps you have such a man in mind. And I've highlighted the next 3 sentences actually. He wants to quit drinking and you want to help him, even if it be only a matter of good business. please underline, you now know more about alcoholism. You can see that he's mentally and physically sick. That's highlighted. Let's underline mentally and physically and circle the word sick. We're not talking about weak. The employer has been given the opportunity to learn about this disease. You are willing to overlook his past performances. Suppose an approach is made something like this. This is an intervention of sorts. And again, we may want to highlight the word approach in blue because it is an approach. This is a 12-part directive for how to intervene, for how to do a good intervention. 1, state that you know about his drinking and it must stop. Must is highlighted in green. It's a must. So here's the intervention of sorts. Number 1, tell your guy right away that you know about his drinking. It's got to end. 2, you might say you appreciate his abilities, would like to keep him, but cannot if he continues to drink. A firm attitude at this point has helped many of us. So there's 2 steps, right? First one, tell him you know about the drinking. It's got to end. 2, that you like him, you'd like to have him continue on. Next, he can be assured that, number 3, you do not intend to lecture, moralize, or condemn, that if this was done before, if it was done formally, it was because of misunderstanding. The same employer, now having the benefit of knowledge, of information about the disease, understands a little bit better. He's not going to lecture. He's not going to moralize.
Number
Hmm?
4.
Number four is, if possible, number 4, that is number 3.
Oh, number 3.
Right, is don't lecture, moralize, or condemn. Number 4 is, if possible, express a lack of hard feelings towards him, right? I like you. You're a good employer. You're a nice guy. But at this point, it might be well to, and here's number 5, explain alcoholism. You now know about the allergy, the obsession, so on. Explain it to him. And please highlight and underline this last word. To explain alcoholism, the illness. Please underline that last word, illness. Say that you believe he is a gravely ill person with this qualification, perhaps being fatally ill. Say that, let me repeat that. Say that you believe he's a gravely ill person with this qualification, being perhaps fatally ill. Here's number 6. Does he want to get well? Explain the illness, make it clear that it is an illness and it can be a fatal illness. So we've made that clear. Now, point number 6, does he want to get well? Does he want to get well, you ask? Many alcoholics being warped and drugged do not want to quit. You may want to underline the word drugged. Because 1, drugs are mentioned in the big book. And in a lot of cases, alcoholics, for example, Dr. Bob, didn't drink during the day. He took drugs during the day. He was eating goofballs, sedatives, barbiturates during the day because he got those cheaper or for free because he was a surgeon and couldn't afford to spend the alcohol in the quantities that he would have needed. I know a lot of people, myself included, that would try very hard to use other chemicals during the day rather than alcohol because it's too easy to detect. So he's pointing out that we know you may be doing other things. But does he? Does he want to quit? Number 7, will he take every necessary step, submit to anything to get well, to stop drinking forever? There's number 7. Basically, are you willing to go to any lengths? If he says yes, you may want to highlight this whole next paragraph just to save time. Let's highlight the whole paragraph. If he says yes, here's number 8. Directive number 8. Does he really mean it? Or down inside, does he think he's fooling you? Or that after rest and treatment, he'll be able to get away with a few drinks now and then, right? I'll get the treatment. I'll just, clean out. I'll start over again. Once in treatment, you will learn that that's not the case. But if you feel that way, you got to understand that guy may repeat. He may relapse. Be that as it may here. Does he mean it, or down inside, does he think he's fooling you? He may get away with a few drinks now and then. I'm going to underline the last 3 lines. We believe a man should be thoroughly probed on these points, be satisfied he's not deceiving himself or you. Now, that's a tough one. And, if the suggestion to me is like asking him if he really means it. Now, every time I said I wanted to quit, I really meant it. I've heard people say it over and over and over. If you hooked me up to a lie detector, it would tell you this guy's telling the truth. He means it. He wants to quit. But I didn't. So this is a tough one. I acknowledge that. When you talk to the guy and you're asked, you really, really want to quit, bear in mind he's going to say yes regardless. When you mention this book is a matter for your, whether you mention this book, is a matter for your discretion. Here's number 9, and I'm going to suggest you highlight the rest of the paragraph. If he temporizes, what does temporize mean? To put off, to put something off. If he temporizes, he tries to put it off, and still thinks he can never drink again, even beer, he may as well be discharged after the next bender, which, if an alcoholic, he's almost certain to have. The guy who says it's not as serious as you think. I'm not going to drink hard liquor anymore. I'm just going to drink beer. Or I'm not going to shoot dope anymore. I'm just going to snort cocaine, or I'm going to eat pills. When I felt I was getting jammed up with all of the Jack Daniels I was drinking, I quit. I started shooting dope. And when that got to be a problem, I quit. And I started eating pills like they were going out of style. And when that became a problem, I quit. And I went back to Jack Daniels. So that's what we're talking about, is the guy who says, I'm gonna change seats on the Titanic. He should understand that emphatically. You are dealing with a man who can and will get well, or you are not. And I'm underlining who can and will get well or not. We've been running into this over and over throughout the book. The 2 people who don't get sober are the cannots and the will nots. I'm going to have to give it out maybe next week. I've made up a handout of all of the references in the book to the cannots and will nots. The cannots, for the most part, because they're still active. You cannot get sober if you're still taking the drug or drinking. Those are the cannots. The will nots, those are the don't drink and go to meetings people. They will not try our solution. They are looking for that easier, softer way, that middle of the road approach. So if not, why waste time with them? This may seem severe, but it's usually the best course. After satisfying yourself that your man wants to recover, please highlight these first 3 lines. After satisfying yourself that your man wants to recover and he will go to any extreme to do so, here's number 10. You may suggest a definite course of action. Suggest a course of action. will pay for your detox, will help you make sure your insurance will cover you for your treatment, whatever. Give him don't just send him on his way, go figure it out. Give him a course of action. For most alcoholics who are drinking or who are just getting over a spree, please highlight a certain amount of physical treatment is desirable, even imperative. Imperative is in green because it's a $50 version of must. But they're talking about detoxification. That sometimes a certain amount of detox is not only suggested, it's imperative. Today, with all the chemicals that are floating around, um, you don't know what the guy is detoxing from. So let him get to a certified place, a detox, an emergency room. Let them start him on his road to recovery by getting the alcohol out of his system. Remember way back in the doctor's opinion when he gave those examples, he said the first thing the patient had to be when he described Hank Parkhurst and he described Fitz Mayo, the first thing was they have to be hopeless. Number two, they have to be detoxified. And that's what we're talking about here. Detoxification. Get the chemical out of his system in a controlled atmosphere. The matter of physical treatment should, of course, be referred to your own doctor. Whatever the method, its subject is to thoroughly clear mind and body of the effects of alcohol. In competent hands, this seldom takes long, nor is it very expensive. Yeah, I wrote ha 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 after that. Anybody who says treatment is inexpensive, I don't think they've been exposed to today's treatment course, but be that as it may. I've highlighted the rest of the paragraph. Your man will fare better if placed in such physical condition that he can think straight and no longer craves liquor. No longer craves liquor. Remember, the craving is used to refer to the physical manifestation of our allergy. We're not talking about the obsession here, that he can think straight when he doesn't physically crave that drink. So get him through those first few days in a detox.
Got 11.
11. That's number 11 is now. If you propose such a procedure to him, this is number 11. If you propose such a procedure to him, it may be necessary to, and underline this beauty, advance the cost of treatment and detox. Today, for the most part, there's insurance. Companies have insurance. You may want to, if you're an employer, talk to your H&R department, your benefits department, to make sure of that the guy has the insurance. But we believe it should be made plain that any expense will later be deducted from his pay. Again, if he's got insurance, that's a different story. Back then, insurance wasn't, I guess, as big an issue. It wasn't provided to everyone the way we need it today. It's better for him to feel fully responsible. And here's number 12. If your man accepts your offer, it should be pointed out that, please underline, physical treatment, in other words, detox, is but a small part of the picture. Though you are providing him with the best possible medical attention, he should understand, and please highlight the rest of this paragraph. He must, and that's in green, undergo a change of heart. Please underline change of heart, not just a change in behavior. It's not about put a plug in the jug and everything else is okay. We know that it's not a problem with alcohol, that guy, like us, we don't have problems with alcohol. We have problems with sobriety. And that's what he's talking about. You don't just change your behavior. It is a change of heart. As Dr. Jung said to Roland Hazard, You've got to change the ideas, emotions, and attitudes that were the guiding force of your life and replace them with a whole new set of principles. To get over drinking will requires a must, and please underline the rest of this, all 3 lines, a transformation of thought and attitude. What could he possibly mean? Spiritual awakening, spiritual experience, moral psychology, psychic change, whatever word you want to apply to it. That's what we're thinking about. Abstinence and stopping drinking is merely a change in behavior. That's all that is. Attending AA meetings alone is only the beginning of the adoption of a new pattern of living. It's our experience that alcoholics must seek a power greater than themselves, and that power is accessed through the steps. And that's how we bring about the necessary personality change, not the behavior change. Don't drink, go to meetings is a behavioral change. We need to access this power beyond human power, and we do that through the steps. And that allows us to change our personality, our ideas, our emotions, our attitudes that were the guiding force of our life. A deep fundamental change. The way Dr. Jung explained to Roland Hazard. I'm not talking about being involved in your local church. We're talking about the change in a man that reaches into his heart and changes his very fiber. Every fabric of his being, every fiber of his being will change. So, will require a transformation of thought and attitude. We all had to place recovery. There's another must. Had to is a must. Place recovery above everything. For without recovery, we would have lost both home, and business. Next to that, I've just written, don't let the things AA gave you take you away from AA. Right? When life gets full, don't let that take you away from AA. Don't let that pull you away from the things that allowed you to get to that point. Can you have every confidence in his ability to recover? While on the subject of confidence, can you adopt the attitude that so far as you're concerned, this will be, and please underline, a strictly personal matter? And you may want to circle that first word, strictly. That his alcoholic derelictions, the treatment about to be undertaken, and please underline, will never be discussed without his consent. And let's highlight that last sentence. It might be well to have a long chat with him upon his return. I've underlined upon his return. And that, I forget who told me this, but I was told this, he was referring to, this is the come to Jesus talk. After treatment, he's about to come back to work. Now's the come to Jesus talk. That we've invested all of this. You've made those changes. The past is the past. To return to the subject matter of this book, it contains full suggestions by which the employee may solve his problem. Actually, this whole paragraph, I'm going to suggest you highlight. And I think we're going to wrap it up in a minute here. Yeah, there's a deleted section, but we're not there yet. So we'll do that next week. So as I said, we're going to highlight this last paragraph. To return to the subject matter of this book, it contains full suggestions by which the employee may solve his problem. To you, some of the ideas which it contains are novel. You may not have ever heard of any of these approaches. Perhaps you're not quite in sympathy with the approach we suggest. Please underline this. By no means do we offer it as the last word on this subject. So far as we are concerned, it has worked with us. Remember page 95. In fact, let's hold our place right here. Let's turn back to page 95, paragraph 4. 95, paragraph 4. Third line down. We have no monopoly on God. We merely have an approach that worked with us. We have an approach that worked with us. We don't have a monopoly on this. If they believe they can get help another way, terrific. For us, we found that the only time we were able to do that is as a last resort when we've tried everything else. Remember the line in the final analysis, that's where God is found deep down inside us? Well, that's what we're talking about. Okay, back to 144. I want to finish this paragraph at least. So by no means do we offer it as the last word, but so far as we're concerned, it has worked with us. In other words, the last thing I tried was the first thing that worked. This is a suggested program. It's only going to work if the alcoholic voluntarily decides to give it a try, despite all the coercion that an employer, a spouse, a judge is going to imply. The decision to apply the solution that we're going to be offering him rests solely with the alcoholic himself or herself. No amount of coercion is going to do that. After us, we're not looking, after all, are you not looking for results rather than methods? Whether your employee, and here's what you may want to put, or prospect, whether your employee or prospect likes it or not, he'll learn the grim truth about alcoholism. That won't hurt him a bit, even though he does not go for this remedy. And like I said a moment ago, it is a suggested program that has to be acknowledged by the individual, that no amount of coercion and threats is going to bring that about. We suggest you draw the book to the attention of the doctor to attend your patient during treatment. And let's highlight this. If the book is read the moment the patient is able, while acutely depressed, realization of his condition may come to him. You may want to underline that word may. Recognition of one's hopelessness, of one's condition, will often produce a willingness to seek help from a power greater than ourselves. Realizing the depth of our problem. Quicksand surrounds us on all sides. From desperation comes willingness. That's the window of opportunity we have with a newbie. That window of opportunity when he's most desperate, most helpless, most hopeless. That's when we're going to listen. You're most likely, if your solution has depth, that's when you may get his attention. Certainly was for me. So, when the man is presented with this volume, we're going to stop there. Realization of his condition may come to him. Let's stop there. We're going to pick it up on the second paragraph. We hope the doctor next week. Let me just stop this.